Okay. All right. Excellent. Thank you. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our winter breakout sessions on accessibility. This morning's topic is using color and contrast, and hopefully you can see the slides there. And my name is Krystal Kennel. I'm a 2023 Accessibility Fellow, Chair of the Theater Department, and an Associate Professor. I am here today, a middle-aged woman with short brown hair and glasses, wearing a white turtleneck undershirt excuse me, a blue sweater. I'm in my Tyler Hall office with white walls and ceiling and several books about theater around me. Um, Today, I am the presenter, but I just want to give credit where credit's due. This presentation was assembled by Casey Raymond and a work group on accessibility practices, and I just added a few things for flair and personal interest. Okay, so let me see if I can get this going. Here we go. Okay, excellent. So today's workshop, I will be, as I said, speaking about our third principle of a basic accessibility, which is to use color carefully. But I just want to review the other accessibility principles while we're here, because these basic principles can easily be incorporated into your digital documents and course materials. And following these strategies will help you prevent the most common barriers to access. So to review, we have identify structured content types, so such as your headings and your bullet point list and numbered lists. Providing text equivalents, meaning use alt text, do not use images as text, use captions for video content and transcripts for audio content. We'll talk about color a little bit more. But the other thing, provide descriptive hyperlinks, use specific but concise words or short phrases. Linked text should describe where the hyperlink will go. Avoid phrases such as click here or learn more. And then use clear language. So be literal and precise and avoid jargon and or idioms. Okay, but as I said today, we're going to talk about using color carefully. So when we talk about color, some of the terms we want to be mindful of, we want to hue, which is essentially the color, right? Red, blue, green, etc. And we want to talk about the intensity of the color, so how vibrant it is, and the tone of the color, so how dark or light the tone may be. So all of these features will impact readability and can impact perceivability of content. And so on our color wheel in the upper right-hand corner of the slide, there is a color wheel, which is in sort of three circles. And the middle circle is our example of our hue. So those are our colors there. And then our outer circle are more tints. They're lighter tones of the color. And so, and there are less intense. And then in darker, they in the inner circle, that's more tones of color. So those have been darkened down. Okay. And so that's kind of some of the terms we're thinking about when we're talking about how to use color in our documents. Okay. And so some of the reasons it is beneficial to use color in our assignments, Brightspace, etc. It can help with branding. It can provide visual interest. It can help group our content to make it easier to read and to understand our documents. And it can also communicate an emotion or a tone. So I think a good example of how you can use color to benefit your materials is actually on the left of the slide. There is the 5 accessibility principles for content authors. And so that's a flyer or a document that discusses these principles, and it's available on the SUNY Oswego accessibility website. And I think we see the 4 points of why you would use color very well illustrated in this document. So for instance, on the bottom of the document, you see the branding of our institution. So you have that dark green with the white Oswego cupola and the accessibility website, some good contrast, which we'll talk about later. And then we have visual interest, how the information is presented. It looks appealing to the eye. It helps with readability and understanding by the grouping of the content. So hopefully you can see on the left, you have one structured content. We have that returned color use of the green and gold, which helps with our branding, of course. And you can see, so the structured content, text equivalents, et cetera, all those things we said. So using color as a heading, that can help. So again, bringing together some of these basic principles, and it can communicate in emotion. It's a very professional looking document, and it looks like it's to be a helpful document for our members of our community. And so I think that provides a good example of how you can use color to benefit the reader or your audience. Okay. And so when we're thinking about color, some guidelines, so we don't want to use color alone for shift menu options as an example. There should also be some sort of additional indicator for people who can't perceive color. So we can have text, we can have a small pop-up, something else. So that leads us to our next text cue or use text cues or labels. Do not rely just on symbols because we don't know, people may not know. And then we want to avoid certain color combinations when we can. So we want such as red and green, blue and purple, and pink gray combinations. Two of the most common types of color blindness make certain colors harder to differentiate or recognize, especially when together. And so we want to be mindful of that. And then contrast. And so we're going to be talking about contrast a little bit more in this presentation, but contrast is using a light on a dark background or a dark text on a light background. And so when we're talking about accessibility, we're talking about presentations, documents, websites, et cetera, bright space, we want to be mindful of the contrast ratio. And I'll give you some more information about that. But we want to be mindful of the ratio between the foreground, what's in front, and the background, what's behind. And so that's a concern of how websites will appear on devices as a default. And while virtually all modern devices have their own internal settings for users to adjust brightness, contrast isn't always adjustable. And so we need to be mindful of that. And background colors on web pages, including when we highlight text, it might be perceived differently by users with visual impairments, and those with visual or cognitive disabilities might also have difficulty reading text at certain contrast levels. So that's why we want to be mindful of contrast. And so these guidelines help everyone. And so they help people with partial or low vision. They help people with color deficiencies. They help aging eyes. They also help low light situations. And they can help folks that are experiencing screen glare, or they have monochrome displays, excuse me. And so aging eyes, poor lighting conditions, or bright light that may cause a glare on the screen are also factors that may impact how someone perceives color. Vision loss can be congenital, acquired, or happen as we age. And people with low vision or color blindness may have difficulty distinguishing between colors. And of course, with accessibility, the goal is that all users are able to read the text on your materials and to understand it. And so I actually misspoke a little bit because while the goal is to help everyone, there are some folks who are left out. Some people with visual or cognitive disabilities or combinations of disabilities that need to be able to control size, color combinations, and the level of distraction. So those are just some of the things we want to be mindful of. We want to do our best in terms of being mindful of accessibility, and then but always be aware that we might be missing some folks. And so one of the things I want to do, I want to step back a little bit and talk about contrast and how I use contrast in my work. So I am a professor of theater, and I am my profession is design for theater, so primarily lighting design. And lighting design is all about getting folks to look where I want them to look. So what we want to see on stage. And so I just want to provide some examples as to, while obviously, we're here to talk about accessibility, but contrast is something that is used throughout all our lives. And so perhaps in our entertainment. So I want to talk to you a little bit about just some of the things as I approach contrast and through the lighting designer lens. So for instance, on the right of the slide, what you're looking at is a production of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella, which I was the lighting designer for. And center of the image, we have a figure, a male figure, that's the prince, who is dressed in all white. And so by where we place the actor and then also how we light them with that white light and that white costume, there is the best amount of contrast between the figure and the dark blue background. And so that contrast helps draw the eye. And so by having that strong, that high contrast ratio, that is a tool I use when I'm a lighting designer trying to direct the audience's attention. We have the three figures behind the prince who are also dressed in white, but they are lit with blue light. And so that contrast ratio isn't as great. And so therefore they sort of fade off into the background. They're still part of the picture, but the strongest contrast is where, the prince who's singing is. And so that's where the eye naturally goes. And so that is one way how I use it. And I'm just going to talk to you through a couple more instances. So here, this was on the Waterman stage last spring. Our production of Romeo and Juliet. And again, looking at where the strongest contrast is, we have 5 figures, male figures on stage in a dramatic, violent scene. One person is getting stabbed. And so, but the high contrast, we have this bright white light shining down on the person getting stabbed at center. And then we have this pool of downlight. And so where the strongest contrast is, again, that's where the dynamic nature is. That's where the highlight is. And over, if you can see over on the left of the slide, we have one figure who's reacting to the violence, but he's not actively engaged in it. And so the contrast ratio is much lower because he's not important in the scene. Okay. And so I'm just going to do a couple more highlights for you. And then over here, another production of Romeo and Juliet. One thing that's hard for me is when we have our characters, we have 2 figures on stage. One figure is a person of color and happens to be mixing up some herbs, our Friar Lawrence character, for those of you who know Romeo and Juliet. And so they are darker skin, they are in dark clothes, and they are against a dark background. And so in this moment, they don't really stand out. And to the left of that figure, we have a woman in a white sort of nightgown. And so that change of fabric helps bring her forward from that dark background. And so that's something that I need to be mindful of. And then one thing more I'm going to do, and they don't know I'm going to do this, but our next slide here is actually from our production of The Importance of Being Earnest, which was on our stage this past spring, this past fall. And in this Zoom session, I'm happy to have my design team with me of my costume designer and my set designer. So I'm just want to do a little shout out to how we all work together. Don't worry, Danielle and Sam, you're not going to be asked to turn on your camera or talk, but I just want to give a little shout out about as theater designers, what we do to help work with, to be mindful of contrast and how it helps our work. So for instance, our figure on the left, she is a young woman in this amazing dress with sort of blue sleeves and pink underskirt. And if you can see, like, her hair is the same color in this picture. It sort of gets lost in the background of this flower trellis that's behind her, because her hair color and the color of the flowers behind with the lighting kind of melds that together. But what this costume designer did is came up with this fabulous pink salmon hat to make that figure really pop forward. Okay, and so again, helping separate the performer from the background. And so that's part of what we do as a collaborative team, using contrast to bring the performers forward. In the middle there, we have the character Elgernon, who, looking at the curtain and the set in his suit, those are very similar in terms of that color ratio. And so they get sort of, so he may get a little swallowed up. This contrast between the lighter green in the suit does help him pop forward. But in this scene, he's sort of listening and kind of reacting to a conversation that's happening. But over on the right, where he's against this purpley blue background, that suit really pops and that figure really comes forward. So those are some ways that I specifically am mindful of contrast throughout my work. Now, for those of you who aren't into the arts, I also have a sporting metaphor for you. So one example of contrast, from what I understand, these are two New York teams. And going back to that branding idea, the use of color helps us differentiate the members on the field. When we are in the arena or the stadium, we're usually further away we're not this close to the action as pictured here of our, I think, New York Jets and the Buffalo Bills there. And so the figures on the green on the left, and the figures in the primarily red and blue on the right, that use of color helps us differentiate the members on the field. But if we weren't able to see and everything becomes this grayscale, it becomes harder to follow the action that's on the field or in the stadium. Excuse me. So that's one thing we want to be mindful for. So when we are thinking about color, our first tip is we don't want to use color alone to convey meaning. So going back to the football, for an example, it's not just, the green and the red team. They also have, their logos to help them differentiate the team. Okay, so we don't want to use color alone. We don't want to just have the red octagon. We also want to put, stop on there. So we want to connect the use of color with text to convey our meaning. And then, for instance, with our yield sign, we don't want just, the red triangle. We want the word as well. So always pair the color with the text. And so as an example, so the Uno game, hopefully you all know. And so this is the vintage edition, which is actually available again in your stores if you're interested. So a little backstage commentary on this. So I actually took these images last night because we were trying to make these accessibility presentations more postable and shareable, but we had a copyright issue. So Casey, I took some pictures for you last night. But looking at these, if you remember Uno, it's about matching, colors and numbers and being able to play them onto each other and skip and draw twos and draw fours, etc. And so for those with color deficiencies and being able to see color, games like that can be a little tricky when you're trying to match color. Okay, because of course we have our red, yellow, green, blue primary colors, but for those with certain differences, we may not be able to see. And so I want to point out that on this slide, I took the bottom picture and then I used filters with Google Slides I used the sepia filter, and then I used the sort of black and white filter to take that same image and take away the color. But sometimes, going back to my lighting design interests, sometimes there are games. So for instance, there's also this game that my husband and I played called Habani, which is a similar matching colors to numbers type game. It's and I won't go into the details with you, but we were actually playing this card game once, and these are two different pictures just taken under different lighting situations, because one time when we were playing the game, we had this very sort of warm, intense amber light filling the room, and we thought we were doing so well and pairing numbers left and right, but then we realized, oh, there's not 4 colors we're trying to team up to group together, there's actually 5. So if you can see, the white and the yellow almost become the same color under certain lighting situations as well. So it may, everyone in your class may have completely perfectly healthy lighting, or excuse me, eyes, in terms of 20/20 vision and full color range, but if their lighting situation is off, that may alter how your colors and your materials are perceived as well. So again, just something interesting to think about in terms of using differences in color and making those colors stand out more. Okay. And so our tip 2 is to meet contrast standards. So this next slide is a lot of different options here. And so we are looking at here a lot of strong, our primary, our colors in terms of our backgrounds and our foregrounds, and just kind of looking at this, we can see that some pop out and then some you almost can't read at all. And so, just taking a moment to kind of look at this and which combinations work, our yellow background and black text foreground, that really pops, and that's seen a lot in terms of safety identifiers, more yield signs and street signs, because that really draws the eye. Even orange and black, we see that a lot in terms of our road construction, things like that, because that really draws the eye. I don't typically see white on yellow, because the contrast ratio isn't that great, and so it's hard to read. It's actually kind of painful. And so we want to think about the colors of our foreground and our background, and so we're going to talk a little bit more about how we can analyze that in a second. But I've said the idea of contrast ratio quite a bit, so I just want to take a moment to kind of break it down for you a little bit. And so the more scientific definition of contrast is a ratio of the luminance of the brightest color to the darkest color that a system can produce. And so contrast ratios range from 1 to 21, written as 1:1 or 21:1. The first number, L1, refers to the relative luminance of light colors, while L2 is the second number that refers to the relative luminance of dark colors. And so what we're looking at here is an example of an 8.4 to 1 relative luminance contrast ratio. And that, so actually, so that's an example of what we might be looking for. And I just want to point out something I don't have a lot of pictures of, but this is something to be mindful of for those more who are putting together data to share in your classes. So your pie charts, your bar charts, et cetera. You want to think about how you use color there as well. And you want to make sure in terms of the colors you use, and we can talk about, so be mindful of tone, be mindful of that contrast ratio, because if you have students who, if you use red and green, again, that may just look gray to your students. And so being mindful of the intensity of the color, the tone of the color, that contrast ratio. You can also put patterns with the color as well. So thinking about how to make that kind of information more accessible as well. Okay. And so how do we figure out this ratio, right? Seems important. How do I figure it out? Let me show you. So before, just a little bit of background or context to this. So these contrast standards, who is it? Who's telling me to do this, et cetera. So there is the WCAG, which stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And these are not just in the US. They're, a lot of the Western world follows these guidelines. And so we're going to kind of break down this slide here. So the WCAG 2.1, so this is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. This is the second version that we are all working off of. They're working on their third version, but our standards are set by this second version. And so then we have that number there, 1.4.3. And let me explain. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, there are tiers to how accessible you want to conform. So there's the A level, the AA level, and the AAA level, which I'll talk about in a second. But the 1.4.3 refers to, so principle 1 are the perceivable principles. The 4 is the guidelines. So the 4th guideline is distinguishable. So the perceivable, distinguishable success criteria is the number 3 there. So that's what those numbers are in reference to. 3 is contrast minimum. Okay, so that's what you're looking at there. And again, there are 3 levels to conformance. There's A level, which you must satisfy these requirements. Otherwise, it will be impossible for one or more groups to access the web content. AA, you should satisfy these requirements. Otherwise, it will be impossible for one or more groups to access the web content. Or level 3, which is sort of the prime, you may satisfy these requirements. Otherwise, it will be impossible for one or more groups to access the web content. So for example, the US Department of Transportation requires airlines to have all of their websites be to AA. So they should satisfy these requirements. Their website should be that AA conformance. Okay. And so there are different ratios based on normal text versus large text. So the normal text, you want to have for the AA level, you want your contrast ratio to be 4.5 to 1. And then for larger text, so when I say larger text, I mean, oops, sorry about that, 18 point to 14 point, if bold and a larger font sizes plus images of very large text requires a 3.1 contrast ratio. So large text, 18 point or larger, normal, under 18 unless it's bolded. Okay. And so the 4.51 contrast for normal context on the AA level and large large text on the AAA level, is intended to address the loss of contrast that users experience if they have low acuity, age-related loss of contrast sensitivity or color deficiencies. And so the WCAG recommends a 7:1 contrast ratio for users with vision loss, equating a 20 to 80 vision, but 3:1 for large text, since large print with wider character strokes is much easier to read at a low contrast. And so that goes back to this, gives site owners more color choices for large text placement, such as titles and headers. Okay, so again, how do we figure out that those differences? So we do have contrast checkers. So this is Web AIM contrast checker, and that's what that site looks like. And so you can, try out different color combinations, and you'll see that contrast move as you adjust, as you try out different settings. I do want to point out that Brightspace also offers this. So if I go to, so this here is Brightspace, and this is, I'm into our advanced theater production class, and we have a content module about expectations and responsibilities. And so hopefully you've seen this stuff before, but if you ever wonder, over here you have your accessibility score, which is hopefully something to look towards. If you ever see this to be reds, oranges, there's some work to be done, and we have many resources available to you to help that improve that score. But I just wanted to showcase if the production. So we have our production contract for students. And so right now, my contrast ratio, I have a white background and a dark foreground. So this dark text. So if I wanted to change that, I could come over here to select color. And wherever you select color, we have this ratio. And again, it's small text versus large text. So not that I would do this, but if I wanted to do a very pale lavender, I am out of compliance. I am not reaching that standard. So I have 1:1. And so maybe maybe orange seems interesting, still not good enough. Okay. So I want to go back to that darker color. And so this is a good example, middle color, mid-range color, you think that might be okay. It's okay for large text, but not small. Maybe I'll come down here to that larger contrast. So I have that dark green foreground and the white background. And so that puts me well above, compliance for any of the web accessibility. So that is a tool available to you on Brightspace if you want to check out any of your colors. And then let me go back to the other thing I want to showcase to you is this fun program here. Hopefully, yep, looks like you can see it. The Color Contrast Analyzer. And so I'm going to go back to this and then come back to have this whole plan. Okay, here we go. Okay, and so we had our fun sort of rainbow screen of options. And so maybe we want to check some. So for instance, this, white text, white foreground, and our red background. With our color contrast analyzer, and this is a program I downloaded onto my laptop, you have a little dropper here. Well, we already have our white color, so that's good. With our our blue background, we are at our AA and AAA levels, which is great. But if I wanted to check the red, oh, okay. So, you may think, oh, stop signs, red background, white foreground, but actually that just passes the larger text for the AA minimum. And so for your websites or, your documents, etc., you may not want to do that. And so keeping our text white, if we wanted to, we know this is bad. We thought it was bad earlier and it's been confirmed. It's terrible. So we don't want to use, I know this isn't the most mind-blowing thing you're going to learn today, but don't use white text with a yellow background. And so this is a great tool, a fun tool to have. And one thing that I like about it is it also allows color blindness simulation. So if you find out you have some of your audience does have some sort of color blindness, you can do the test as well. So for instance, if we wanted to check, maybe some of this, blue background and a yellow foreground, that's kind of interesting. It doesn't look terrible. So let's choose that here. And then we want to choose our, whoopsies, it's kind of this yellow here. So we find out it mostly passes except for our AAA. But one thing it does is it showcases, what that would look like. It sort of simulates what that would look like for someone who has color blindness. And so, for instance, when I was putting this together, back earlier, it was like, don't put together green and red. And I'm like, oh, okay, I wonder why. Well, let's find out. So if I do the color picker for red and I do the color picker for green, okay, not great. I do have some large text there, but it also showcases how the colors will shift to those who have some form of color blindness. And so that's kind of that's a great tool to have when you are looking at stuff like that. So again, that is the Color Contrast Analyzer, and it is a downloadable program for you. Okay, almost done here. Tip 3, you want to use a limited color palette. We all love color, but you do want to contain yourselves. So too much variation can be distracting. You may not be sure where to look or know what is important. It can take away meaning if you're not, if you are using too much variation, people, again, by not knowing where to look, you may, sort of lose what's important. It can place the focus on the visual choices rather than the content. So that's very true. People might think too hard about why is that highlighted and in red, and like, what is it actually saying? Okay. And so when we think about using color, I would limit it to 3 to 4 colors, a light and a dark, and maybe a medium. And then if you do need more, maybe you break it up with a pattern, going back to, if you're putting together bar graphs or pie charts, etc. You want to use color consistently for the same type of content. So thinking back to that accessibility flyer, all of the headings were the same green color. So that helps with understanding the document. You want to minimize distractions. So just looking at my page here, I can see a little bit of color peeking out. So I'm going to cover that up. There we go. Minimize distractions. And again, you want to use color to set the tone or mood. If you're talking about accessibility, maybe you don't want, bright colors next to each other. That can be very distracting, and it might be too erratic, basically. Okay, so that is just a little briefer about things to think about when you're using color. Of course, there's a lot more accessibility information on our website, oswego.edu/accessibility. And I do want to highlight there are 2 upcoming sessions on Tuesday. There's one about captioning at 10 in the morning, and then there's another one about universal design for learning, which again is all about accessibility and making all of your content accessible to everyone. And then so that is our website again. And so I'm going to stop sharing and see if anyone has any questions or anything. Or Casey, if you want to jump in on anything I messed up.
No, I don't have anything to add. It's like folks are generally sad.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. So I don't